Well, I think folklore actually means everything to me, really, which I know is a big claim, but once you start looking at the world through a sort of folkloric lens, you realise how important, how essential it is to everybody, and also how equal it is. So everybody has folklore, regardless of where you come from, what your class, your gender. We all have something to contribute, and I think that's a great leveller. And once you start thinking like that, you realise how unifying folklore can be, particularly at times like these when I think, we're living in quite unprecedented times when our communities are quite fractured. And actually, I think folklore can actually bring us together. I think that's so important. So the thing about folklore is that a lot of people arrive at it in different ways. And for me, it was traditional music and folk song. So I discovered this in my teens. It opened up this whole world of sound, of song, in a particular way that I just found absolutely fascinating. I'd never heard anything like it. And particularly English song, when I heard it, I was like, oh, this is from where I'm from. And I hadn't really up to that point considered that. And from there, I was able to unpick those stories, which led to this whole world of folklore. So I think folk song can be a real, genuine way into folklore, and it is for many people. And we're living at a time where folk song is actually very popular. We have lots of young emerging musicians who are breathing life into folk song and bringing, electronica and rock and other mediums and mixing that with folk song. And that has always been the case, that's nothing new. But it's great to see that is still continuing. And there's some really exciting music going on. And through that, I think we can unearth folklore in new ways and see folklore in a new light. I'm originally from North Oxfordshire, which is well known for its Morris. It's Cotswold Morris, so that's the Morris dancing with handkerchiefs that is the sort of archetypal Morris that people think of. And actually, when I was quite small, me and a lot of my friends, we just used to think it was really naff. It was something that old men did, old bearded men with big beard bellies. It was nothing to do with us. And then when I discovered folk music, that's suddenly when it clicked, and I realised, the music that I've really started to enjoy, that's been written for Morris dance. So that was when I really started to think about Morris dance in a completely different way. Think about, the places that it came from, what it meant to the people that danced it, and this really long history. Morris dance has been around since at least the 1400s or so, I'm led to believe. So that's really exciting. It was a courtly dance that then spread out to the communities, and it has had a really interesting history with people doing very different and exciting things with Morris along the way. So I've been interested in it for some time. I've only recently started dancing Morris dance. It's only in the last couple of years when a side local to me started up a women's side. So brand new, I'd never done any dance before, and I've just found it to be lots of fun, really exhausting, far exhausting than you think it's going to be, and a great way to meet people in my community that otherwise I might not have crossed paths with. So I'm just loving being involved in Morris dance. So calendar customs have been a real interest of mine, and it's something that I researched for my PhD. Calendar customs is another word for traditional activities that happen in the communities. We have a great many in England, right across, up and down the country. And once I discovered calendar customs, I just become fascinated by them. Why might we in Britain today still do these customs that, they might have been invented for reasons that are just completely obscure, or things that we just don't need to do now in contemporary society, but still every year people come out and do them. So things like cheese rolling or following a straw bear around the streets, fascinating things, great fun. And that's what I became absolutely fascinated by. I wanted to know what compelled people to do them, why people feel like it's something that they want to keep doing, what is making them do this year after year. but also who really abstains from this as well, who feels excluded, who thinks that they're ridiculous, or I'm just as interested in that really. So I've started looking into how it's been represented in literature and creative writing, and then it's something I've just continued to think about, and more broadly in terms of how folklore is represented in literature as well. Yeah, so this might come into my answer for a bit later as well, so I don't know if that matters, but shall I just
go ahead?
Yeah.
Fine, yeah.
So I find that folklore and literature have quite an interesting relationship, really. So it's a bit of a bee in my bonnet, I think, because I find that particularly contemporary literature likes to include folklore for a bit of titillation, or when there's something supernatural and a bit shimmery, let's bring a witch in, or let's add some strange folklore. And as a result, I think people have begun to think of folklore as something as weird, witchy, occult, and as such we're kind of forgetting that everyone has folklore, and we're participating in folklore all the time, whether it's going on a hen do, for example, or blowing out candles on a birthday cake. That is folkloric, and it's every day, and it's really important. And so I've been thinking about particularly how calendar customs are represented in folklore. It's often when something weird is going to happen. It's often to bring shame on a community, or to sort of hone in on this strange insular community. And as if to say that people that do this kind of thing are weird, are strange, are barbaric even. And as a result, I want to shine the light then on folklore that is represented differently, that literature actually shines a light on folklore in that everyday light, and that is something I'm striving to do with my own research and my own writing. Well, I think now is a really exciting time to be interested in folklore in the UK. I don't think the profile has ever been higher. You switch on the radio and there's all sorts of programmes about folklore. There's multiple podcasts, lots of programmes on TV, whether that's drama or non-fiction, factual stuff about folklore. So there's a real excitement about it. I think practitioners are doing really exciting things about folklore. Visual artists, writers, filmmakers are all using folklore. And I think as a folklorist, now is the time to critique that and work out why people are doing that and why now. What is it about these times that we're living in that makes folklore so interesting to people, to viewers, to readers, to the everyday person? I don't think I have those answers yet, so I feel like I'm living in this time now and need to do some real research, and that's what makes it so exciting. So I think folklore is represented in modern media as a bit of a bizarre sort of eccentricity, which, that's quite nice, that's quite fun. You're every year we'll see the reports from Stonehenge at summer and winter solstice, for example, or at the cheese rolling, when it's a sort of, oh, look at these people doing this thing. Isn't it strange? Aren't we weird in Britain? And I think that's nice, but there is such a whole other world to folklore that I think is often overlooked. And I'm sure the same can be said for paganism. I think pagans might be held up to be shown as a type of person. And I think it should be multiple perspectives on that is certainly overlooked for the media. So I think folklore and paganism does a certain job for the media, and I think the media could do a lot more with that and look into the everyday. What is folklore to the average person? What can it mean? How can it bring us together?
Well, folklore's got a lot to do with paganism, especially in my particular case, because I came into paganism through reading the stories of Alan Garner, which were very much based on folklore, and my interest in his books got me interested in folklore, and that in itself tended to lean towards paganism. Basically what happened was, back in the late 70s, I was in the library, in the Salford Library, and I saw a card on the wall sort of saying, folklore class starting. So I went along to it, and although they were teaching a little bit about folklore, what they were actually Wiccans who were looking for potential members. And so I got into it through that. I mean, it's a direct link with folklore, but folklore has got a lot to do with a lot of the beliefs in magic as well. people always go along with the folklore, the traditions and the countryside and everything like that. So it's a huge thing. I'm a bit more flexible on that. There are a lot of calendar dates that people really adhere to. But when I was working on a farm, was in part of a rural tradition, they never heavily depended on dates. They intuitively looked at the weather, how the season was. Dates weren't important. There were always approximations of the actual festival dates that are on the calendar, but it was never that important. And I've carried that on. I've never been that fussed about actual dates, you know, because a lot of it is all about feeling the nature, and I really sort of adhere to that. I greatly love Robbie. One of the things I like about folklore is that a lot of it is so common to the areas that it evolves in. You get various folklore from different parts of the country. You go to Cornwall, for example, you get the Pixies and all that sort of thing, the Arthurian trends. And you get other trends at different places. Well, the locations are quite stunning, how they sort of have their own little beliefs and folklore. And I love all of it. It's always difficult to sort of take a lot of it seriously, obviously. It's just, a lot of it's just myth and story. But it's quite fascinating to go to a place and know that it's got a kind of folkloric history to it. Yeah. And it gives it a kind of a mythic feeling, which is really great about these rural villages, because they're full of them. You know, everything from things like the Abbots Bromley Horn dance down to rush cart in Upper Mill and places like that. The folklore that continues with them acts within the community as well. They all follow that thing. They love it. You know, they had a vicar in Abbots Bromley, and he tried to sort of get rid of the horn dance. He thought it was heathen and not Christian, and the local people got rid of him. It's sort of like they didn't want that, and it was the same at Upper Mill. They had a similar sort of thing with the rush cart celebrations there. The people get behind that local tradition and folklore, and it's very embedded. It happens every year around about August Bank Holiday in Saddleworth, Upper Mill, and basically it's a cart with a huge throne of rushes with a guy on top. A guy sits on top, and it's pulled through the parishes by the Morris team, and there's lots of Morris teams go there, especially for the occasion. There's lots of Morris dancing, going around, drinking, celebration. And one of the beliefs of the rush cart itself is made of rushes, and they believe it was believed to be a phallic symbol and very good for fertility. And there was a tradition that anyone who was getting married would go to the rush cart and touch it, because the bride would want to get pregnant. Yeah. And that's a long-standing story, and it still goes on. People go there and touch it, you know, for that reason. I mean, folklore, it's sort of, there's a lot of, there's a thing I mentioned in my book, and it was mainly about Morris dancing and rush cart, things like that. And for a long time, people have tried to understand what was the meaning behind Morris dancing, where it originated, and so on and so forth. And various theories come up, you know, they jump up and down to sort of encourage the crops to grow and so on and so forth. Some of it is absolute rubbish, but it's accepted nevertheless, because it becomes a new folklore. It's like it's a birth of a new bit of folklore. There are Morris teams that know very well that their dance has nothing to do with anything strange like that, or fertility, or making the crops grow. But they accept it because it is a new thing. And once it's accepted like that, it becomes a kind of a real thing in itself. You know, that folklore becomes real. Yeah. And it carries on throughout the community, and they accept it. Well, like I say, they become real. And the more people feed into the stories, the more real they become, and they become relevant after a while.
Well, they become their own thing.
Yeah. You know, some people take the folklore a little bit too seriously. Some people accept it as it is. A lot of it is whimsical, a lot of it is local. And I think there's a growing interest in it. We recently lost a friend, an author named Neil Phillip, and he was quite a guy on folklore and folk tales. And the fact is, when he died, there were so many people sort of mentioning him in respect of folklore. and folk tales and stuff that she was a bit of an expert on. And it seemed to indicate that there was a huge interest in it out there in the general public, even just for whimsical, entertainment. It's out there, and a lot more people are celebrating, folk traditions and rural traditions, and some of them are being reinvented for the sort of modern times, because the rush cart in Uppermill, that was resurrected in the early 70s. It vanished long before that, but they resurrected it, and immediately the people took to it, and it became a huge thing pretty much overnight. And similar sort of things have happened elsewhere. Other rush carts have appeared at different areas, and it seems to be a cyclic thing where these old traditions and the old folklore just will not die. They'll just keep going and keep reappearing, and sometimes they will change and reinvent themselves, but they're still there, and they're still growing, and they still capture the imagination of the people. Well, we was actually invited to Gorton Moot by Rob Burrows, because he said they were after somebody to do a talk, and he'd asked if we'd be interested in doing one, and we did. And we went there, and we rather liked it. The whole complex there, the building, the staff, and everything that's going on there, is a really sort of interesting place. I mean, we went back a couple of times, didn't we? Went for a book fair there at one time, and we keep saying we'll be going back there again for another talk at some point. In fact, we were supposed to be doing that when we got the new book out. We said when we've got the new book out, I'll do another talk, and I never got round to telling them. So yeah, we just find it a lovely place. The people are nice, and what's really nice about it is that there's that non-denominational thing where nobody is looking down their nose at somebody else. You don't get Christians staring at pagans or vice versa. They all work together, and I really like that. I mean, I got a couple of books from there because one guy there's a Christian guy did a thing about the gorillas at Bellevue, and fascinating little book. It's very spiritual, but it's also very Christian, and I loved it because I've got no problem with Christianity, and they have no problem with me. Mostly.
So what was that book about? Sorry, the gorillas of
Bellevue. Yeah. It was on sale at the Gorton desk there, and I'd heard someone mention it, and I had a look at it. I thought, I'll pick that up, and I did do. And it's quite a interesting little book, And that's I think that is sort of like the epitome of what Gorton is. It's full of like-minded people who don't have any grudges, no axes to grind. They just have an open understanding of each other.
And I want to see the books.
Oh yeah, she wants to go to the library there.
I haven't talked
UK. Very positive. Like I've said before, the rise of folklore and the rise of interest in paganism and other spiritual alternative paths is quite phenomenal. Having come into it in the sort of like late 70s, there was still a lot of problems with Christians and pagans, and we had the satanic child abuse flaps. But it's become more and more respected now. A lot of people understand it. Even people who at one time have laughed at you and said you were silly for being a pagan, and accused you of dancing around naked and so on and so forth. Even now, they're sort of quite understanding about it. They understand. They're beginning to understand what paganism is about and what a pagan is, what a Wiccan is. And you still get a few naysayers, but on the whole, people generally get the gist of it. And I think that's positive. And folklore is also becoming a very major fabric in a lot of the fantasy genres that we're seeing on film, TV, books. Fantasy is being fed by folklore, and then the folklore is being fed by the fantasies, and so it's an ongoing thing. So that's, to me, it's a positive thing. It's because it lets people use their imagination, if nothing else.
So how does paganism affect your everyday life?
Well, for me personally, it takes up a lot of the time because I run the magazine, which is also a Facebook group. I've got many people that I interact with. I'm a trustee of Pagan Aid, which is a charity, I have the magazine work and book work that I'm doing. So it takes up a lot of the time. But it also means that when we go out anywhere, we immediately go into the countryside. We are in our temple. We are in the very nature which we are dedicated to. So literally every day is like a day of worship.
Yeah.
You know, and even though it's not in a sort of very rigorous, dogmatic way, it's a very personal thing. And we just love the landscape. And no two sites are the same day after day. We go up to towards Kinder, and Kinder looks different day by day. You can tell the subtle differences, and that's part of what we believe in with animism. You get the communication with the landscape, and we just within it. We become part of it, really.
Magazine.
Well, the magazine Green Man's been going for about 33 years now. I started it by accident in Brighton. We was at a festival in Sussex. And unfortunately, half the festival got blown away by gale force winds. And one of the chaps who wanted us to help him was a guy called Tam. And Tam was a representative of the Pagan Federation, and can't remember the pagan organisation at the time. No, okay. Well, Pagan Federation anyway. And he asked us if he could put his literature on our table. We had a good strong table, thankfully, and a big sturdy bender. And we said, yeah, sure, no problem at all. And we had people coming to the table and sort of saying, what's going on in the pagan world in Brighton or in Sussex? And I'm sort of saying, I don't actually know what's going on. I am a pagan and I do stuff, but I'm not really involved with the pagan community. And so I took names and addresses and said, I'll pass these on to Tam. I'll get him to contact you with information. Unfortunately, Tam never came back. He vanished, and we didn't see him again until about 20 years later. So we decided in our wisdom to ask around about what was happening in the pagan community in Brighton, Sussex, and do a one-off newsletter, a single-page thing to send to these people to let them know what was going on. We got in touch with the local Pagan Federation members, and they came to us, and they were wonderful, and we got to know about the pagan community. And before we could even consider just one-off newsletter, it had become a magazine. We'd sort of decided to have more stuff, and it was going to be a one-off thing, but it didn't. We started getting people writing in about it. They'd heard about it, and so we continued. We celebrated 30 years of it about 2 or 3 years ago. We had a celebration in New Mills, and we've got readers all over the world. It's a very small magazine with a very small subscription, but there's always people who know of us, and they respect us for some bizarre reason. And I think it's because we don't have any qualms about anything. We try to be original, we try to be friendly. We assume that anyone who's bought the magazine is a friend. Yeah. We've actually invited people over for a weekend just because they bought a magazine, We're quite happy to do that sort of thing. And we became involved while we was in Brighton. When we were doing our 20th anniversary, we became involved with the Centre of Pagan Studies and the Doreen Valiente Foundation in preparing and putting a blue plaque up where Doreen Valiente used to live. And so we're very close with Centre of Pagan Studies and Doreen Valiente Foundation. Through them, we became very close to the Pagan Federation, and the president of the Pagan Federation had become a good friend of ours, Mike Steigel. Through that, I became involved with, we became involved with the Pagan Heathen Symposium, which is a group which was formed to help sort of get things done in the real world, so to speak. Things like addressing pagan marriages, and the details of that, and safeguarding people at events, because obviously
Yeah.
in a pagan world there's very various people, and there's some dubious people. Let's not deny that. So they do some good. They're a bit slow at getting things done. They're terrible at meeting. I've not had a meeting for about 2 years, but they do get things done. And the magazine's been going from strength to strength. We've had a lot of people writing for us, people like Professor Ronald Hutton, Ramsay Dukes, and various other big name writers, or celebrities, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And then we decided we're going to start writing our books, because we've both had books in us for a while, and I'd spent some time in Italy with the Strega, the Italian Strega in the mountains, and I wanted to write about it as a sort of comparative to what English witchcraft was, and it just wasn't coming together until we moved up here, when Talis realised what I was missing was a common thread, which was animism. So we pulled that together, and we got our first book, The Mountain and the Stream, which was a hugely successful book. It was originally started off as a limited edition hardback, and we had to reprint about 7 or 8 times now.
Mm-hmm.
But the magazine itself, we tend to try and be original, and we're very much a cottage industry. We print it ourselves, we write it ourselves, produce it ourselves, and we don't go down the usual route of telling people how to read runes or tarot cards or things like that, or spells for this, spells for that. We'd like to get involved with the history and other aspects of the craft, which is not usually mentioned. We try to be original in what we write. We don't want to write things that people have written a million times before. And this seems to struck a chord. We do have a core of very loyal followers. One would go so far as say fans, because of some of them actually look like fans. When we did The Mountain and the Stream, there was a lovely guy down in Kent, and every time we mentioned the magazine, he would write about it, put it on Facebook, saying this is the best book ever. Everyone should read this book. Everyone should read this book. I was sort of like, we were a bit worried about him at first. We thought he might be a stalker of some kind, you know. But we went out, actually went down and did a talk down in Kent. We stayed with Mike Steigel and did a talk there, and this guy was there. He's a lovely guy. He really does love our stuff, and it's sort of like, that's nice. It's nice. And so yeah, we continue to produce the magazine. I tried to give it up several times in the past. It just won't let me. Whenever I tried to give it up, excuse me, in the sort of mid-90s, I'd suddenly get a huge batch of subscriptions. So yeah, I just had to do it until the subscriptions ran out, and then more people came, and it came together quite well, and it's still going. And I'm happy to say we're still happy doing it. We have good fun.
That's great.
So yeah.
Perfect. Do you have that book?
Well, I think it's kind of been on the rise since the early 2000s, really, and it's kind of took off since 2010, because I particularly write about folk horror, and Mark Gatiss made a TV series about kind of British horror, and he talked about this thing called folk horror and named this unholy trinity of films: The Wicker Man, Blood on Satan's Claw, and Witchfinder General. And it's just kind of risen and risen and risen, and I started writing about it, and I thought there's a peak in interest here, but it's not kind of tailed off. It's just continued growing, really. And I think things like that combined with a pause, because sorry, the light's gone off.
No, that's fine.
Okay, sorry.
Let me continue.
So that kind of stuff combined with difficult social times, economic times, I think people tend to look to their past. They look at alternative ways of thinking, ways of being, and just get really interested in alternative culture. So just to try and make sense of things and look at what other ways can we explain our lives, really. I mean, folklore is storytelling, and we use storytelling to kind of explain our lives to ourselves and explain the world. So looking at what stories, folk tales, folk beliefs, all that kind of stuff. But it's also been combined with, there's been this kind of popular culture rise of folklore as well, in things like digital communities, digital culture. You get pagan talk, witch talk, loads of stuff all over the internet, across all social media platforms, and TV as well, programmes like Wurzel Gummidge and Small Prophets that's been on lately, and Detectorists. All that stuff draws on folklore, but also more explicitly, like Charlie Cooper's Myth Country. There's a show on Amazon called Gatherings that looks at folk customs around the country. So there's this kind of real interest in popular culture, which of course has a knock-on effect that everybody else gets interested in it. So there's all these kind of communities popping up around folklore, folk culture, and I think it really helps bring a sense of community in quite a fractured society. Everything, completely, everything, everyday things. A colleague of mine said, defined it quite nicely as the stories we tell, the traditions and customs we share, and the beliefs that we hold. And if that doesn't kind of encompass everything, I don't know what does. I mean, I see, as a folklorist, I really want people to understand that everybody has folklore. It's the everyday stuff. It's the which way round do you put the knives and forks in your cutlery drawer. It's which way round do you hang the toilet roll on the toilet roll holder. It's from stuff like that through to what customs do you do at weddings or at Christmas, or what beliefs do you practice? What do you walk under a ladder or not? So it's really properly everyday stuff. It's not all the kind of magical and supernatural, but it encompasses all that as well, which I absolutely love. And I really love that folklore helps us to see the magic in the everyday, in the natural world, in the environment. Kind of we imbue meanings in things and tell stories about them, and all that is folklore. That's a really interesting question. I think folklore, as it's represented in horror, is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and reading about. And I think overall, it's kind of a positive effect in that it's raised interest in folklore and folk horror. And it's definitely, folk horror is something that has definitely brought a lot of people to folklore. It's one of the first ways they find out about it. It creates interest. But it's often portrayed as something strange or a bit unsettling or scary, which is not necessarily always the case. There's a lot of practices and customs that are done for look or for celebration, and in folk horror they're used as, oh, that's a bit weird, or that's a bit strange, and outsiders don't understand local customs. So there's often a kind of twist put on it. So the way it's used in film and TV, for example, is often that to suggest there's something scary or elitist or exclusionary about it. But when you learn about folklore in reality, it's actually usually for joyful purposes or for luck or protection, that kind of thing. So I don't know if that's positive or negative. It's definitely not necessarily a true representation, but it's arguable what is real folklore anyway, because folklore is everything. It evolves and adapts, and you can create your own folklore. There are local Sheffield customs, for example, about there are Christmas carols that are very particular to Sheffield. There's Sheffield sword dancing, but there are also Caribbean customs, Somali customs, Eastern European communities that practice things that anybody who goes to a certain pub in Sheffield at Christmas that's singing a certain Christmas carol that you've never heard before, you would suddenly feel like Sergeant Howie in The Wicker Man, like turning up on the island and not understanding what's going on. But I'm sure you'd be very quickly welcomed into the fold. So I think maybe it creates a bit of unsettled feeling for people, but as soon as you know the purpose of it and it's maybe celebratory, then yeah, it's maybe a
Yeah.
positive thing.